I'll have to admit to you that I seldom know what to do with Transfiguration Day. I find it very hard every year to figure out what I'm going to preach on this particular day. And as I'm preparing for the sermon on this Transfiguration text, I often sit at my desk and I stare straight forward, wondering if anything new will ever pop into this little brain of mine. And this story that we're telling today is really kind of weird if you're honest about it. It feels very anti-modern to me. Some dead guys show up on a mountain with Jesus, whose face and clothes turn dazzling white. Eventually, a cloud overshadows Jesus, the dead guys, Moses and Elijah, and Jesus' friends who come up with him on top of the mountain. And then a voice speaks from a cloud. I mean, this is really quite weird. And what do you make of all this? And what kind of handy advice can flow from such an experience? I don't want people to leave without some kind of agenda for their lives. And for me, Transfiguration Day feels a little agenda-less, somewhat useless to me. And one thing that I am not is a preacher who has an agenda of uselessness. I want to say something that makes a difference, that changes people's thoughts or changes their behavior. I'm the kind of person who appreciates the mindset of those who, in the midst of a project being done, scream out, "Don't just stand there, do something." Well, for me, Transfiguration feels like a lot of standing, a lot of staring, a lot of doing nothing. I mean, look in the text, the disciples almost fall asleep in the text. If you know me, doing nothing is not me. Doing nothing's not my cup of tea. It isn't my thing. It doesn't float my boat. I don't like to do nothing. A lot of doing nothing. A lot of staring. A lot of standing. That doesn't attract me. But maybe there's something there. Maybe once in a while I need to pay attention to my sense of uselessness. In our psalm for today, you and I are taken back to two of the primary traditions of Israel, the temple tradition and the Mosaic tradition of liberation or freedom. And it's the temple tradition that initially hears calling my name. Walter Brueggemann calls this tradition the tradition of presence. I think you know that the temple in Israel's early history was thought to be the venue for the presence of God. It was a special place to be discovered by the awe and wonder of life. It was a huge edifice that provided people a sense that God indeed is holy, different, mysterious, beyond description. It enabled worshipers who were used to the reality of the king to be grasped by the unsurpassable royalty of the God of the universe. And listen to the psalm today. The Lord is king. Let the peoples tremble. The Lord is great in Jerusalem. That's where the temple is. He is exalted over all the peoples. Let them praise your great and awesome name. Holy is God. This tradition of presence takes us to what I like to call beholding. I think that's so much better than seeing. It takes us to beholding, to seeing in a new way, to staring a little bit with your jaw dropped, to sensing even your uselessness. In a world where everything we do is thought to be so important, where everything our kids are involved in is believed to be so vital, where the tiny tyrannizes too many of us, where the media we know seems so preoccupied with the banal, the most base, the ugly, the violent, you and I would do well to allow ourselves to be taken to the big, to the sacred, to the holy, to the tradition of presence. I was really taken in this past week by a quote from Jonathan Ortberg, who said, "For many of us, the great danger is not that we will renounce our faith. It is that we will become so distracted and rushed and preoccupied that we will settle for a mediocre version of it. We will just skim our lives instead of truly living them." Well, the tradition of presence, the temple tradition, won't let us skim over life. It won't let us be so distracted by so many things that we miss out on the really important things. It will grasp our attention so that we behold life in a brand new way. Transfiguration won't put up with all of our distractions, letting us get stuck in the petty and the puny. Transfiguration wants to stop us from being so busy, so preoccupied with everything that we think is so vital. It wants to take us up on a mountain, overwhelm us with a cloud, frighten us with our smallness, call us to stand and do nothing. And it also wants to reacquaint us with some dead guys who link us to a grand tradition. It wants us to see the glory of God discovered in the face of Jesus. Now, Luke tells us that it was about 8 days after Jesus had taught about his upcoming suffering when he was transformed on the mountain. You all are really smart. I know you are. The number 8, Luke just doesn't mention 8 because, he was counting. The number 8 means something. Many of you know the number 7 is one of the numbers of completion or perfection. That's why it takes 7 days to create everything. That was never meant to be thought of as literal days, for heaven's sakes, but it was meant to be what needed to happen in order to get the job done. 7 days. And so if we're talking about 8 days, you're good at math, I know. 7 or 8 is 7 plus 1. I knew that Michigan education was really good. 7 plus 1, 8. That is perfection plus. We are gathering on the day that was thought to be the day of resurrection. This is the day of the new creation, life as it ought to be. So we, in other words, are getting today the big picture. We're getting a foretaste of the feast to come, an experience of resurrection. The light is shining on the great future that we are moving toward. Therefore, it's worth our while now to be overcome once in a while with awe. Life has this amazing ability, if we are truly open to its depths, to cause us to shut our mouths, quit talking, to drive us to our limits, to open us up to something much grander, much more spectacular than ourselves, our problems, our small dreams, our anxieties, our preoccupations, our addictions, and most assuredly, our opinions. Transfiguration wants to take us to that something more spectacular right before we head off into Lent, the season of suffering. For you see, and I know this to be true, and it's been true for me lately, sometimes in the midst of the suffering, we can forget about the big and the spectacular. We look at Jesus and we think, he's just a failure. The light shines on Jesus today so that we know that the one who has just told his disciples that he is going to suffer, that he's going to be crucified, going to be a victim of the world's powers, is seen as the one who actually reveals to us the holy God. God's greatness. And you got to get this point. God's greatness and holiness is not just seen in his power, but it's seen and experienced in his suffering, and particularly in his suffering love, his willingness to get messy with the pain of the world. This insight leads us right back to Psalm 99 to discover the second great tradition mentioned in it, and that's the tradition of liberation and freedom. It fascinates me that both of these traditions are brought together in one psalm. In this psalm that speaks of the bigness and the greatness and the holiness of God, we hear these words: Mighty King, greatness, bigness, lover of justice. You have established equity. You have executed justice and righteousness in Jacob. God is not only wonderful and grand and big, but our God cares for what's going on in the suffering of human beings on earth. And we are told that God, this God, the holy God, is a God who loves justice and who establishes equity. God is a God of liberation and freedom. That's what the story of the Exodus is all about. And many of you and many people in this world right now, including the people of Ukraine, are experiencing what it means to live under oppression. And the promise of the Scriptures is that God is on the side of freedom. God is on the side of liberation. The big God, the holy God, the one who is over all of the universe, is so big that he can leave behind his bigness to care for the left out, the poor, the vulnerable, the oppressed, those held in bondage. This is one of our big stories. And you can't tell Israel's story without the Exodus story. And you can't tell our story without this story. In today's text about the Transfiguration, we experience Moses and Elijah speaking of Jesus' departure. The word for departure there is Exodus. Jesus is leading his people as he heads to the cross toward freedom and liberation. And now I know very well that it is hard to trust that when it seems that the world is unfair, that those in charge are often unjust. I know that when you look at the world and it seems that the evil prosper, it is hard to believe that God is on the side of freedom and justice, but that is our claim. God, the big God, the holy God, is not some self-preoccupied God whose concern is only himself and his personal glory. No, God, the big God, the holy God, has a heart for you and for all who suffer. Which, by the way, is really the point of the cross of Jesus. The suffering of the world, according to the cross of Jesus, is the suffering of God. The tears you cry are the tears of God. And today, the light of Transfiguration is shining on the one who's heading to the cross. The one who so beheld the holy and just God that he poured out his life for the sake of the people God sees with a tender heart. Jesus is going to the cross. Not because it was a plan. He's going to the cross because he loved people and he embraced the folks that the world often won't include. He's going to the cross because freedom and liberation is what the God he trusts is all about. So I guess if I get that, I won't see Transfiguration as agenda-less. Yeah, by the way, it's worth your while to stand there and not do something for more time than the culture will want you to do. Yes, it's worth your while to gaze at the light, behold it, lose yourself in it, but the mountain ought not to be your home for too long. You and I, eventually we got some work to do. The work of justice, the work of freedom, the work of joining a suffering God and making this world a better place for all. Yeah, he is a beautiful Savior who compels us to drop our jaws and fall to the ground, but his true beauty is to be discovered in his cross-shaped compassion and love. We truly behold his holiness as we get to work on the ground to live out love and compassion. Amen.